Hi, my name is Tomasz and you're watching Casual DIY channel. In today's video we'll be re-reviewing a budget jointer slash thickness planer from Titan, which is a base brand for Screwfix, a shop here in the UK. Check out the video. So I had a lot of requests from you guys to actually go and re-review this tool, to give it a bit of attention, to let you know how it performs after a couple of years of usage. So let's check it out. So now, as it's at a bit more comfortable height, we can talk about this machine and I'll give you my thoughts after I think it's just over 2 years of usage. So the first crucial aspect of this machine is actually not its features, it's the price. So you can pick it up in Screwfix for £159.99 of British pounds. Me personally, I actually managed to pick this machine up for 125 quid a couple of years back and think it was on offer at that point as well. So 125, that's a good price. 160 is not too bad. I think on the market this is still the cheapest jointer and thicknesser machine in one, with a relatively small footprint. Although this machine is very heavy, so if you're planning it on moving it around your workshop, it's not the best idea. It needs to have a space because it really weighs a lot, and I have been moving it around my workshop for a long time, and tell you what, it's not the best thing to do. Right, so the next thing I want to talk to you about is how loud this machine is. Why? Because it's really loud, and do not approach this machine without your ear defenders. And to show you how loud it is, I've got the reader here, so we can have a look. It will be 1 meter away from the machine, and you can see how many decibels it actually produces. The problem is it's 1 meter away, but you actually have to stand next to it. But I test all my tools how loud they are about 1 meter away, so I've got more or less a clear indication of how loud each machine is. So let's test it out and find out how loud it really is. But how about if we actually test it next to the machine? The next thing I want to talk to you about is the fence itself, because in a position when this machine is set up as a jointer, this is make it or break it of this machine. So how good is it? It's pants. It's really bad, and to be absolutely honest with you, you're probably going to be better off making something yourself. I have stick to it because I managed to actually get it square-ish. Saying square, the bottom part of this fence is actually fairly square, whereas it probably from the ridge over here, it just goes out of square. You've got a void there. Whatever I did, it made no difference. The fence itself is basically slightly bent. It's the similar thing at the back. The bottom onto the first ridge here, it's fine, that's all square to the table, but everything above that, it's out of square. Although I have heard few opinions that the fence was so bad, whatever you did, you could not get a square reading. And at the back of the machine, that's the mechanism that is holding the fence itself. And yes, you do have fairly a large amount of flexibility of setting this, the fence up, as long as the piece of metal or whatever it is, I don't think it's aluminium, I think it's actually metal, is straight itself. So you've got the angles, you can change the angle to it. Obviously you have to set up initially the scales on it because they're not accurate, and I would use a additional tool to make sure you're actually getting the angle you want. And yeah, you've got the ability to undo these bolts here and make the adjustments that you need for this to work, and that's what I had to do initially for the fence to be actually usable at all. Now my experience with this machine is only based on using it as a jointer, and that's why I've bought a Metabo thicknesser as a separate machine. And if you want, I can make a video on that one as well. The only reason I bought that, it was on offer. I bought it for 250 quid, whereas now I think you're looking about 450. So just to give you a bit of an indication, if you can get it for 250, get it, is really good. But if you want, I can make a separate video about that, as it does have its own flaws and issues. Obviously, you've got the guard for the blade, and it's fine. There's no issues with that. It's not the best, but it works. Practically, you can joint boards or make straight faces of boards that are no wider than 21.5 centimeters. So depends on the work you do, that actually may not be enough. I found myself struggling with that because some of my boards were actually wider than that. So it's not the biggest of tools, and the table itself, the length of it is actually just, let's have a look, 74 centimeters. So from one perspective, small workshop, absolutely perfect tool. Let's talk dust extraction. Well, it's not dust, it's chips really, because they're not dust particles. Maybe a little bit, but majority will be just chips. So, to be fair, you need a 10 centimeter hose, which I don't have. Why? Because when I had the hose and I used it a few times, the majority of the chips were actually coming from this side, from the front, and they were just piling up and up and up and up, and that was regardless of if I had the vacuum on or not. And when this gets filled, the chips are actually starting to come out from the other end. So in the end, I really gave up. As I say, I just wear a mask and that's fine with me. I've got no issues with that. But for those that are looking for a clean tool, it's definitely not the way to go. Although, where credit is due, when this machine is actually set up as a thicknesser, the extraction works really, really well, as you have to change the plastic that's underneath the machine at the minute to the top that will actually catch all the wood chippings. It does work quite well, and I had no major issues with it. But the main reason I've actually stopped using this machine as a thicknesser and just set it up as a jointer is because the hassle and the effort and the time you have to spend to actually transform this machine from a jointer to a thicknesser. There's a plastic piece that it's actually triggering the safety switches on this machine, so if it's not correctly placed, then you can't use the machine, it will not work. And the screws and the bolts and messing around with it, it took me nearly 20-25 minutes to change this machine from one job to another. And obviously when you are making a glue up, anything like that, you need both tools. So you obviously need a straight board with straight edges, and at the thickness you actually require. And again, you are fairly limited to what you can throw through this machine. As I mentioned before, 21 centimeters is probably the max you can go. Hence, I bought a separate thicknesser and the issue is gone. Although it does have its own problems. Now, two machines, more space, and obviously the cost is way, way more. But in my perspective, the jobs I was making, the projects I was doing, it actually sped my workflow immensely, and the ease of use, having both machines set up like this, it was just common sense and a way to go for my workshop. But I understand many of you will not have the funds or don't want to spend too much money. And from that perspective, this is not a bad tool if you're making smaller projects. You have to remember that this table is actually fairly short, so if you've got a very long board to joint it on this jointer, it will be a hassle and it will be almost impossible to do. Another thing that I want to mention to you from the perspective on the jointer, you can go up to 3 millimeters of taking the material off, although I would never ever recommend doing that because you would kill the engine on it. Definitely up to 1.5 mil, that's absolutely max. Obviously all depends what wood you trying to work with, but with my particular machine there's actually a slight problem with the tables themselves. Now, I've actually heard some horror stories where the tables were absolutely out of square, they're twisted and all that. You get that with every machine. You can get a bad example of absolutely everything. Now, in my case, after some time, the front table that goes up and down is actually got a bit of a wobble now. I would say 0.5 millimeter it goes up and down. Obviously, if you're putting pressure on the wood, it stays where it needs to be and you can push it through. Although I would have to say that probably it does add a bit of inaccuracy in your work. For me, it wasn't big enough. It still does a fairly decent job, but that's one of the things that were repeated constantly by the people I was speaking to about this machine. So it looks like it's a little bit of a common problem with it. You actually do have this lever here that in theory should be securing the table itself to prevent it from having that movement, and it did for a while. Now the plastic knob is just spins around the securing bolt, and the bolt inside I've actually destroyed the thread because I was using a hex key to do it up and undo it, and after some time, even if I change the bolt itself, it makes no difference. I think the mechanism inside is now broken. But as I say, if you put the pressure on the table, it really doesn't move, and this still gives me a fairly decent outcome. So it wasn't a much hassle for me, but I've heard that some guys had really struggled with that, and obviously asked Screwfix to replace their tools. Now, from one perspective, for the tasks I was doing in my workshop, it did the job. It's definitely not perfect, and on some of the larger projects, as I mentioned, I did struggle a lot, and I had to buy some additional tables at the front and the back to make sure the larger boards are not causing me an issue. The jointing ability of this machine is fair. It's not perfect, and if you were in the trade and tried to make a proper, really nice looking table, you're definitely going to be struggling with this machine. But for a general purpose DIY like myself and many of you, it could be a fairly good deal. Now, there's a couple of things you need to consider. It's cheap and it's made cheap, so don't expect it to be perfect. The noise is absolutely horrendous, and that will limit you when you can actually use your tools, so the neighbors will not call the local council to sort you out. If you're not bothered about losing time of transferring this machine from a jointer to a thicknesser, then again you're gonna be fairly happy with it. You know, I had this machine for over 2 years and nothing major actually happened to it. It still works fine. I do have a second set of blades on it, and you can actually buy them fairly cheaply from Screwfix. The air bower blades fit in this machine just fine, and there's no issues with it. Obviously, again, it's a fairly complicated process of actually putting them in, and it took me a while to get a grasp of that, but yeah, they work just fine. Now, for 159 quid, I don't think there's anything else in the market in that region. I believe there's one from Airbauer that you can get for about 220 British pounds. But essentially, I'm led to believe that's more or less very similar to this machine. So you're not gaining that much for so much more money. So it all depends what you need it for in your workshop. Would I buy it again? This is an important question, and the answer is no. I would definitely spend a lot more money to get a really decent jointer. If I had this knowledge before, I would definitely save the money and not buy the Metabolt 250. I would definitely not buy this machine 120, and probably save up another 200 quid and buy something a lot more decent, used but still decent. And you can get some really good quality jointer and thicknesser in one. Obviously they are costing a lot more money, but in the long term I think it's definitely worth picking those up rather than having the setup I've got. It all depends what you're going to be using. If you always going to be using it for DIY purposes and you're not going to expand, and that's what you're going to do, this could be a good solution for you. But looking from perspective on time, in my opinion, if I make a few tables for the outdoors and all that, I would definitely struggle with that, and it will cause me a lot of issue to set this machine up. Yeah, I would buy something larger. But all in all, it's a fairly good tool. As I said, you know, having it for a few years, nothing broke, nothing happened with it. It still works fine and it does the job fairly good. Obviously, you have to set it up correctly, and I would actually suggest making your own fence. There are a few YouTube videos, I'll try to link them down below. Have a look, because it's definitely worth doing. So that's for me, guys. If you're interested in any other of my tools in my workshop, I'm actually doing a series of videos where I do reviews. So it's a catch up after a couple of years of usage of those tools to actually tell you what happened, what broke, what still works, and if they're any good. So there should be a list of this video coming up over here just now, so you can click it and check them out. But for me, that's all. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for your time. Till next time.